Hi, I'm Cassie from Me Time. This is a tutorial for the greenhouse from Collectible Christmas Holiday Village. The greenhouse comes the same month as the toy store, and it is so fun because this is the only Holiday Village house that is not held up with shapeform. I know, it seems crazy. This is made completely out of chiffon and vinyl. And we know that might seem just a little bit tricky, but don't worry, I'm here to walk you through the whole process of stitching this greenhouse today. So today we're going to stitch the back of the greenhouse, then we'll stitch the front of the greenhouse, then we'll stitch the roof of the greenhouse, and then I'm going to show you how to assemble the super cute thing. We're going to start with the back because that is where the instructions start. Let's get going. So one of the most important things to do is to make sure that you starch and press your chiffon very well. We want it to be a little bit on the stiff side, and you're going to be using 2 layers for each of the pieces. So you're going to have 2 layers for the front, the back, and the roof. So just make sure they're nice and stiff. One of the amazing things about stitching this greenhouse is you do all of the stitches on the chiffon and the vinyl goes on at the very end. What? I know, it's going to be really cool. So let's get started. I've already hooped our wash away stabilizer. We're going to stick it into the machine and stitch our placement line for the chiffon. Okay. So I have stitched this in that light mint colored thread. And normally I know I do placement lines in a darker colored thread so that you can see it better on camera. But this is all very, very see-through. So I'm going to keep it the color that is going to have all the main stitching, which is that really nice light mint color. So you might be able to see this, but there is a nice placement line right here. I'm just going to trace it for you. And then I'm going to take 2 layers of my already starched chiffon fabric and I'm going to place it completely covering that placement line. Now I do want to make sure that I tape this really well in place because as you stitch, chiffon will move and shift a little bit. So I'm going to put a good amount of tape on here to make sure it doesn't do that too much. I'm going to tape the top and then I'm going to smooth it over and I'm going to tape the bottom as well. This way it will be held nice and where I want it to stay. Okay, once we have it taped, we are going to put it back into the machine so that we can stitch the tack down line. Let's do that right now. Okay, we're going to leave that tape there in place just to help hold the chiffon throughout the whole process. But we do have our tack down line and we're going to do all of our stitching inside of that line. Machine step 3 is stitching the accent placement line. So we're going to do that right now. Okay, now that we have stitched that placement line, we're going to take our accent fabric and we're going to place it completely covering that placement line, and we'll also tape this in place. I just do one at the top here and then smooth my fabric and do one at the bottom. And then we can stitch the tack down line. Okay, now that we have that tack down line stitched, we're going to take our scissors and we're going to trim close to the stitch line. So I'm going to remove the tape just on the fabric, not on the chiffon. And then we're going to give this a quick little trim. Remember to always do your trimming on the same side as whatever hand you are. So if you're left-handed, trim on the left side. If you're right-handed, trim on the right side. So I'm right-handed, so I'm going to make sure my hoop is where I need it. And then I'm going to place my scissors and I'm going to cut. And we'll just trim close to that stitch line all the way around. Now that we have the fabric all nice and trimmed, we're going to start stitching the details on the chiffon. Machine step 5 is stitching the plant leaf detail. I've changed my thread to a nice light green and let's get stitching. Machine step 6 is stitching the Christmas tree fill. I don't have to take my hoop out of the machine because it's the exact same color. So let's go ahead and stitch it. I'm going to take this out just for a second so you can see these amazing stitches on the chiffon. So we have the tree and the plant leaves, and next we're going to do more for this plant. So I'm excited. Machine step 7 is stitching the flower fill. I've already changed my thread to a nice pink color, so let's go ahead and stitch it. Okay. Before we stitch the holiday lights on the tree, we're going to give our little details here a quick little trim, and that's just to keep them out of the way and make it easier in the end, so we don't have all these little threads everywhere. So just be careful of that nice fill stitch and then just give them a quick little trim. Then we can return the hoop to the machine and we can stitch the lights detail. Machine step 10 is stitching the star and the lights detail on the tree. Now this is done in our yellow color thread. Let's go ahead and stitch it. Machine step 11 is stitching the birdhouse fill. So we're going to quick change our thread and go ahead and stitch it. Machine step 12 is stitching the birdhouse roof. Let's go ahead and stitch it. Machine step 13 is stitching the birdhouse detail. It's in the same color as the roof, so we can just go ahead and stitch it. Okay, I'm going to take this out for just a second so we can see all of this amazing detail that we stitched right on the chiffon. So look at this. We have a birdhouse and a tree and these beautiful flowers and all this accent, and it is just so fun. Machine step 16 is stitching all of the greenhouse detail. And when I say that, we're talking about all of these amazing lines that give it that greenhouse look. This is a really fun satin stitch, and I'm so excited to stitch it with you. So let's get going. Okay, I'm going to show you these details. Look how awesome that is. All of a sudden we went from a piece of chiffon with some stitching on it to a greenhouse look with little panels of glass, and I absolutely love it. But we're not done yet. There's a few more things to do, and then we can show you how this looks at the end. But before we do the next stitch, we have to trim the chiffon. This seems a little bit strange because all of the other houses, we don't trim a thing until the end. But we have to trim the chiffon so that we can do a satin stitch around here, and when we wash away that stabilizer, it doesn't have any stabilizer sticking out funny. So we're going to go ahead and take our scissors, and we're going to lift up that tape that we left on this whole time. We'll just cut it off as we go, and we're going to cut very close to that tack down line with our scissors. Okay, now that we have it all trimmed, I want to point out how important this is. The last thing we want is to have that satin stitch with the chiffon sticking out of it all funny when we wash away the stabilizer. So I'm going to just point out how close we are. We want to be very close to this outline stitch so the satin can cover it completely and have a beautiful finished satin edge. So once you have that all nice and trimmed, we're going to return it to the machine to do that satin outline stitching. Machine step 18 is the greenhouse satin outline for the accent fabric. Let's go ahead and stitch it. Okay, so what we've done is we've done all of those satin stitchings, and if you look at it, it now looks like a nice wall of this greenhouse. So at this point, we're going to give it the structure. It's still chiffon. It's still going to be wiggly and floppy, and it will not stand up. So what we need is the piece of vinyl. So we're going to take our vinyl and we're going to make sure that we don't have a bunch of threads or fingerprints or anything on it. It's a good idea to just kind of give it a brief rub down so that you don't get anything trapped, because once you put this vinyl on, that's it. You're not going to be able to get it off again. And then I always like to double check and make sure I don't have any threads that I need to trim. because now is the moment. And once I'm satisfied with how my stitching looks and my vinyl is all nice and clear and doesn't have any fuzzies on it, go ahead and place the vinyl completely covering the whole project, and we're going to tape it in place. And then before I stitch, I always do a double check because the last thing I want is that one thread I should have caught. So I'm going to double check and make sure. And then once I'm satisfied, we'll put it in the machine for the tack down line. So machine step 19 is stitching down that vinyl. All right, so let's take a quick look at this. This does a lot of tack down stitches around that really makes it seem like the plants that we stitch are inside of the building. And I love how it makes it seem like there really is glass there. So at this point, we're all done with our project and we can remove it from the hoop. We'll just set that aside. And we're gonna take our scissors and we're gonna do kind of a rough cut just to kind of get a bunch of that stabilizer out of our way. And then we're going to trim this up really nice. All right. So we're going to trim very, very close to that satin outline again, because we want to make sure that this is a standalone building without anything extra sticking up because of how these walls are put together. And we'll talk more about that later. So we're going to remove any of our tape that we have. And then we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut really close right here next to the side seams. And unlike the rest of the houses where we leave about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch above, we're actually going to cut really, really close to that satin outline. Just be very careful that you don't actually cut the satin stitches. I'm going to come at it from this way, very close, very careful. And same up here on the top. Really close. And really close here. Give it a good corner. Then again, right next to the tabs, as we always do. And then the bottom again. Try and cut this as straight as you can because this is going to be sitting on your hard surface. We want to make sure it's straight. So try and do a fluid cut if you can, and not a choppy cut where you close your scissors a lot. Okay, so once all of that is cut out, we can remove those excess pieces. And then, because we don't want the vinyl in our side seams when we sew them, we're actually going to remove that. So we're going to take the tabs, and I'm going to just fold this one down so that it's flat against the back. And then you can see this piece of vinyl is just sticking up here. So we're going to take our scissors and we're going to cut very close to that tack down line here and just cut out that vinyl so it's not going to be in the side seams. So vinyl is here and this is just that chiffon. And we're going to do that to the other side as well. So we're going to take the chiffon and the stitching side and fold it down. So this is sticking up here in the wind. Take our scissors and we're going to cut really, really close. And then that is free from the vinyl and we won't have that making our side seams all bulky. So at this point, we are ready to wash away the excess stabilizer. There's stabilizer here on the back and we don't want to have that on our finished project. It's not going to let the light shine through as well, and we want to have that kind of fun glass look. So we're going to take this to the sink real quick, give it a wash, and then set it aside to dry. All right, now that our back is all washed away and drying and set off to the side, it's time to stitch the front of the greenhouse. I've already hooped our wash away stabilizer, so we can go ahead and put it in the machine and stitch the placement line for the chiffon for the front of our greenhouse. All right. And just like the back, we're going to take 2 pieces of our already starched chiffon and we're going to lay it completely covering that placement line so that it lays nice and flat. And we're going to tape it a little bit extra because we don't want it to move. So we're going to put tape on the one side, then we're going to smooth our chiffon so it's laying as flat as possible and tape the opposite side. And once we have it nice and taped, we're going to return it to the machine to stitch the tack down line. Let's do it. All right, now just like before, we're going to leave the tape and the chiffon just as it is so that when there's any stitching, there's no shifting going on. And we're going to stitch the placement line for the accent fabric. Okay, so with this accent placement line, you'll see a difference between the front and the back, and that's this little gap right here. That is where we are going to put the door. So we don't want the accent fabric there. However, we're going to still place the accent fabric, completely covering both of those placement box lines. And we're going to tape it in place at the top. Smooth the fabric down and place the next one on the bottom, and then we're going to stitch the tack down line. Okay, now that we've finished stitching that tack down line, it's time to trim. And this time we're going to make sure that we trim out this box here and the fabric here in between, and then this one here. And that way we have that door space. So go ahead and grab your scissors and let's trim close to the stitch line. All right, now that we have that all trimmed, we're going to return our hoop to the machine and stitch all of our light green details. Machine step 6 is stitching the plant outline. I'm going to quick change my thread and then we'll stitch it. Machine step 7 is stitching the flower planter. I've already changed my thread, so let's go ahead and stitch it. Machine step 8 is stitching the stars on the trees. Machine step 9 is stitching the tree pots. We're going to go ahead and change our thread and then we can stitch it. Machine step 10 is stitching the flower fill. I've already changed my thread, so let's go ahead and stitch it. Machine step 11 is stitching the decorative outline for the flower. Machine step 13 is stitching the tree tinsel detail. Let's go ahead and do it. Machine step 14 is stitching the accent details. Okay, let's take just a second to look at these amazing details we just spent our time stitching. So we have this beautiful flower and these really cute trees and this holly berry that is actually going to end up on the door. Now we're going to return the hoop to the machine and stitch those greenhouse detail lines. Now remember, these are the detail lines that make it look like there are glass panes to create that greenhouse look. So let's go ahead and stitch it. Okay, so what we just stitched are all of those window pane kind of looking details. And this is how it looks. It looks a little bit strange right here. This is the door, and that's because the door frame is going to be in a different color, so don't worry, it's all good. Machine step 16 is stitching that accent detail satin stitch. So we'll put the hoop back in the machine and get that stitching. Machine step 17 is stitching the satin outline around the door. Machine step 18 is stitching the doorknob in our brown color. Okay, let's take a look at what we got. So we have that door here now, so it looks a little bit less strange, and we have all of our detail stitching. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our scissors And we're going to trim very, very close to that tack down line, making sure that we remove almost all of that extra chiffon. So we'll grab our scissors and get to it. All right, now that we have that all trimmed nice and close, as you can see, just like we did on the other side, we can return the hoop to the machine and stitch that outside satin outline. All right, so we have everything stitched to the point where we need to put our vinyl on. Isn't that exciting? Now there's a couple things that are a little bit different about the front vinyl versus the back vinyl. And that is that we're going to stitch the door down in a different color. So we'll stitch that first. And then it's going to stitch the whole rest of the windows down and have that look. And then after that, we're going to stitch the sign greenhouse. So just a couple things that are different. So make sure you do those steps and you don't just count it done right at the beginning. So we're gonna wipe off our vinyl and make sure that it's free of any little threads or fuzzies. So we don't want those stuck on our greenhouse. And then we're gonna double check our threads here. We wanna make sure that we don't have anything that needs to be trimmed or cut, because once we place the vinyl, it's kind of too late. So I like to just do a nice double check, even run my finger around it, just make sure that there's nothing sticking out that I need to trim right now. And if there is, go ahead and trim it. And then you can take your vinyl and cover the project completely and tape it in place. And then because fuzzies happen out of nowhere and like to stick to vinyl, I like to do a final check, make sure that there's nothing hanging out in there that I don't want there. And once I'm satisfied, I'm going to put it into the machine. And machine step 20 is stitching that door outline in pink. So as you can see, we just stitched down that door with that pink color. So we're going to return the hoop to the machine, and then we're going to stitch down the rest of the little panel lines in that lovely nude color. Machine step 22 is stitching the greenhouse sign. That's in a dark green color, so I'll change my thread and then we can stitch it. And with that, we have finished stitching all of the stitches for the front of the greenhouse. So here we go. This is what it looks like. You have the cute greenhouse sign, all of the wonderful windows, and the plants inside. So at this point, we can release our hoop and remove our project. Just set that aside. And then we're going to, just like the back, kind of trim away all that bulk of stabilizer so we just don't have it in our way while we're trimming up our greenhouse. We can just give that a rough cut and then toss it aside. And then we're going to cut really close to these side tabs, being very, very careful not to cut any of the satin stitches. You want to be very close, but not clip any of them. Same with the bottom. We're going to go nice and smooth, very close to the edge. Try and do this in one fluid cut instead of little choppy cuts so that it has a really nice finished edge. Then we're going to go over here and cut really close to the side tabs. And then we're going to do the front, remembering that the front is going to have the roof attached to it. So we need to make these as smooth and nice as possible as well. So we're going to cut really close. And then I like to come in this way because I want a really nice sharp corner here. So we're going to cut kind of both ways until we get a good corner there. Then we're going to cut along the top, nice and close and straight. And then this last little bit right here. And then after all of this cutting, we have a wall done. Okay, so then we have to do the important part of removing the vinyl on these tabs. So we're going to take that tab, that's just the chiffon and stitching, and fold it down and take our scissors and cut very close to this tack down line here to get rid of that excess vinyl. Then we're going to flip it over and do the other tab side. So fold that chiffon down and take your scissors and cut really nice and close to remove that vinyl from the tab, so then they're free and they won't be stitched in that side seam to give us a nice, beautiful corner. So once that's done, we need to wash away the excess stabilizer that's still behind all of our stitching and then set this aside to dry. Now that we have finished stitching the front of the greenhouse, it's time to stitch the roof. We're going to let both of those continue to dry while we stitch. So I've already hooped our wash away stabilizer. We can go ahead and put it in the machine, and we're going to stitch the placement line for the chiffon for the roof. Now I have to tell you, you will love the roof because there's no color changes. Just put your light mint color in and go for it. All right, so I've stitched that placement line. We're going to take our already starched chiffon, 2 layers, just like the front and the back, and place that completely covering that placement line. Then we're going to take our tape, and we're going to make sure that that chiffon is laying nice and flat and doesn't move while we're stitching. So go ahead and tape the top just like usual, smooth the chiffon in place, and then tape the bottom. And then at this point, after it's all nice and taped, we can return it to the machine for the tack down line. Machine step 3 is stitching all of those greenhouse roof detail lines. Go ahead and stitch it. So now that we're done with machine step number 3, we have all these beautiful lines on the roof. And I want to point out some in particular. This one here and this one here are where we're going to put the glue. So that's why they are super important. The rest of it is just to look beautiful and pretty. So at this point, we can grab our scissors and we're going to trim away that chiffon, and then we'll do our satin outline stitch. So grab your scissors and make sure you're trimming very, very close to that tack down line, not leaving any chiffon sticking out hardly at all. Now that we have all of that chiffon trimmed, we can return the hoop to the machine and stitch that final satin outline. Okay, I'm going to show this to you really quick. We've done the beautiful details that make it look like a glass paned greenhouse, and then we have the beautiful outline stitch so that we have a nice finished edge. At this point, we're ready to put on our vinyl. So just like before, we're going to wipe off that vinyl, try and make sure that we have all the fuzzies and fingerprints and little threads off of it. Double check that there's nothing that needs to be trimmed. Then we'll place our vinyl right on top. Oh, I see one bit that needs to move. You can always move it after you set it at this point. Then go ahead and tape that vinyl in place. And give it one more double check. Make sure there's no threads or anything you need to trim. And then we'll put it in the machine and we'll stitch the final tack down. All right, and with that, we are done with the embroidery. Isn't that exciting? Okay, so we're going to release the roof from our hoop, set that aside, and then just like before, we're gonna cut away all of that excess stabilizer just so it's not in our way when we're doing that detailed trimming. We'll just get rid of that and toss it to the side. All right, I'm going to remove the tape. So that we just don't have that in our way either. Okay, and then just like before, we're going to trim very close to that satin stitch line without actually clipping any of it. We're just going to try and do as smooth as we can without any choppy cuts, so that we can have a nice finished edge. We're going to just slide it through and then do that final side. Okay, and I want to point out something that's really important. What it did when it did that final tack down stitch is it gave us 2 lines. We have one right here and one right here, and those are where we're going to fold to make that roof shape. So they weren't there before, but they are now, and we can make sure that we get that correct shape so that it has that flat roof on top and the two flaps on the sides. So now that we have this all finished, we can wash away the excess stabilizer on the back and set it aside to dry before we stitch it all together. Now that we have our greenhouse all nice and dried, we're ready to assemble it. So I've taken the front and the back and I've placed them on top of each other, aligning the side seams just here and here so that we have everything where we need it to be. And I like to use at least 3 clips. I like to put 2 on the bottom to keep my alignment there and 1 on the top so that nothing shifts while I'm sewing. Then we're going to shift over here to our sewing machine and we're going to stitch those 2 side seams. So here we go. Okay, so we're going to just line up our seam on our sewing machine. We're going to stitch this side seam. Make sure to back stitch at the beginning and end of your sewing. And then I'm going to switch it over to the other side and we'll stitch that side seam. All right. So now it's time to turn the greenhouse now that we have those side seams stitched. So we're going to stick our hands and we're going to kind of pull it apart. Because it's vinyl, it doesn't pop like the other houses. But I like to give it a little bit of a squeeze to kind of give it our shape. And then you can take one of the sides and turn it through. And then have the other side follow. And flip it inside out. And this is just fine for the vinyl, it's not going to hurt it. All right, so now we have our greenhouse together as far as the 2 walls. Okay, so vinyl, we have to be very careful when we iron it. It will melt, it is plastic, so you must use a pressing cloth. However, we do need to give our greenhouse a little bit of a press or it's going to have this odd kind of round shape, which is not what we want. And so we're going to just arrange our side seam kind of where we need it to be. I kind of do a little bit of a wiggle just to make sure it's where I want it, and then using a pressing cloth I'm going to cover that corner, take my iron and give it a press. Don't leave it here very long or you're going to have a melted mess. And then I'm going to flip it straight over. You can feel that it's warm and soft. Again, I'm going to put the pressing cloth there and press just for a second. And then I have one corner done, so I'll just move to the next one. Again, kind of wiggle and arrange your corner until you have that stitching right where you want it. Cover it with the pressing cloth and give it a press just for a second. And then flip it over, pressing cloth down, and then press. Okay, now that we have that corner, we're going to move to the next one. Again, wiggle and arrange it until you like how your corner is going to look. Put the pressing cloth in place. Place the iron and press just for a second. Then we're going to flip, press the other side just for another second. And then we're going to get our last corner. Make sure that we have that pressing cloth in place. Make sure everything is looking nice. All right, okay, and all of a sudden I have a much more square looking greenhouse. And after it's pressed, it looks like this, nice and square. Okay, so this greenhouse needs to be glued together with something other than fabric glue because it's made out of vinyl. I have chosen to use a low temperature hot glue. However, you are welcome to experiment with other craft glues to see if something works better for you if you would not like to use the hot glue gun, but I have chosen to use that. So I'm going to have that, and we're going to put glue on just the roof edges so that we can glue that roof down. Okay, so we also have to press the roof. And if you remember right, I talked about these two lines. We have this line here and this line here, and that's going to be our hinge points so that we can have the right shape for our roof. So we're going to wiggle and arrange it until we have the stitching just in the center. And with the pressing cloth, we're going to cover that, and we're going to press down with the iron just for a second or two to give it that shape. And then it all of a sudden has that bend, which is exactly what we're looking for. Then we're going to do the other side. Give it a wiggle till our stitches are where we want it to be. Put the pressing cloth down and just give it that press. Just enough almost to warm up that plastic, but not melt it. And then we have that shape of the roof we're looking for. So we're going to set that aside. And then we're going to get ready to glue. So because I'm using hot glue, I'm going to glue this in stages. I'm going to start by gluing the back and putting the glue right here on that glue line I talked to you about earlier. It's just this big satin line here, right there, and then right there. So I'm just going to put glue along this edge, and then I'm going to set it on and wait for it to dry. And we're just going to glue things in pieces instead of all at once. So I'm going to take my glue and just run it right along this edge here, making sure I have a little bit but not too much. And then I'm going to take my building and I'm going to line up that back wall with that glue, and then I'm going to hold it in place just until it dries. And I like to kind of turn it and make sure everything is lined up the way I want it to be, because since I'm using hot glue, I have a little bit of wiggle room if I need to adjust. And then I'm just going to hold it and wait a minute. Once that back is dry, I'm going to lift up the roof and I'm going to put glue just along this edge, or if it's easier, you can do it along the front of the building. That's also fine. And then I'm going to line the front up with that glue, and I'm going to hold that in place. And we're going to let the two sides of the roof just kind of fly open like wings. That's okay right now. Okay, when it comes to gluing the sides, we're going to put glue along those gluing lines still, and a little bit right here on the side of the building. So I'm going to take my glue and I'm going to go up both sides, there and there, and then I'm going to put a little bit here so I have something to hold it on that side too. Then I'm going to line up all my edges and then hold that one side in place. Just give it a minute to cool down. Now that we've done the one side, we're going to take our glue and we're going to do the same thing on this side. Put the glue on this edge of our gluing line and the other. And then a little bit here on that lip. Line everything up so that it looks really good, and then hold it in place until it cools down. After your greenhouse is all nice and glued, it looks like this. Isn't it adorable? Just nice and cute and looks like a little glass building, and it's so fun. So just make sure that when you're making this, pay attention to starching your chiffon really well, being careful when you do your pressing cloth for ironing those seams, and to make sure that when you use a low temperature hot glue gun, you're using it with caution. Thank you so much for joining me today for this tutorial for the greenhouse from the Collectible Christmas Holiday Village. I hope that you will like and subscribe and follow us for more content, and enjoy some well-deserved me time.